我们为您报道最新的华语资讯。通过严格的验证和遵守卫生协议，在新的一年，我们更早地为您提供资讯。别错过每周一至周五早上7点的美读新闻。
World News, Senin hingga Jumat live jam setengah 12 malam.
Hello, good evening. How are you? You're watching World News from Metro Globe Network, and we are live from Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm Iqbal Himawan, and here are our top stories for tonight. Traditional celebrations returned to the 4th of July as the U.S. makes progress on the pandemic. But first, a massive explosion at a factory on the outskirts of Bangkok has sparked a huge fire, injuring at least 11 people and prompting evacuations. Firefighters worked through the night to control the blaze, climbing through the twisted steel wreckage to get close enough to the flames. The initial explosion at a foam and plastic pallet manufacturing factory shook nearby Zabarnagum Airport. The airport officials say no flights had been cancelled. People living within 5 kilometers of the scene have been ordered to evacuate, sheltering in a school and government office. Authorities fear that thousands of liters of leaking chemicals may cause more explosions. There has been no word on what might have caused the fire. Philippine troops have found the last 5 dead from a transport plane crash, raising the death toll to 50 in the military's worst air disaster. The Lockheed C-130 Hercules overshot the runway while landing at the Jolo Airport in Sulu province on Sunday. It slammed into a coconut grove, bursting into flames. Authorities rescued 49 military personnel, some managing to jump off the aircraft before it exploded. The military says an investigation is underway and may consider factors such as weather, equipment, and skills of the pilot. The C-130 was one of the 2 refurbished U.S. Air Force aircraft handed over to the Philippines this year. To Japan now. Dozens of people are missing and at least 3 are dead after a major mudslide in the city of Atami. Mud ripped through rows of houses on a mountainside in the vacation city following several days of heavy rains, residents hearing a giant roar before seeing their homes swallowed up. Hundreds of rescue workers are working through the thick mud, but continuing rain and fog has obscured the scene. Coast Guard ships and several military drones are assisting the search. Officials say that land development upstream may have been a factor in the mudslide. The disaster comes less than 3 weeks before Japan is set to hold the Olympics during a worsening pandemic in the country. Cuba has evacuated more than 150,000 residents as it gears up for tropical storm Elsa. The storm has battered several Caribbean islands, killing at least 3 people. The Cuban government has opened shelters and moved to protect its valuable sugarcane and cocoa crops ahead of the storm. Most people are evacuating in relatives' homes, but hundreds living in mountainous areas are taking refuge in natural caves for the emergency. On Sunday, Elsa Center was about 20 kilometers west of Cabo Cruz, Cuba, and was moving northwest at 22 kilometers per hour with maximum sustained winds of about 95 kilometers per hour. The National Hurricane Center in Miami says it expects Elsa to gradually weaken while moving across Cuba on Monday. Let's move on to other news. Pope Francis is recovering at a Rome hospital after undergoing intestinal surgery. The Vatican says the 84-year-old pontiff reacted well to the planned surgery for diverticulitis, narrowing in the large intestine. On Sunday before his surgery, Pope Francis announced a planned trip to Hungary and Slovakia this September, making no mention of his operation. Pope Francis is staying at Rome's Gemelli Hospital, where doctors performed surgery on Pope John Paul the second in 1992. As the Taliban grows stronger and take control of more territory in Afghanistan, foreign journalists were invited to view newly seized weapons on a military base. The groups push closer to the capital's Kabul, comes as US-led coalition troops are withdrawing from the country 20 years on from when they first arrived. Meanwhile, as the Afghan government remains relatively quiet, several civilians are saying that the Taliban have brought them security.
دای خپل کات کې د دای ګروپو ته به هیڅ څوکم چې لګ عقل ولري فکر ولري او افغاني احساس ولري په داس ګروپو کې به څوک کار ته زړه خنه کوي طالبان نه وو راغی ډي سي وچ کور کې ولګدو دای زخمی کو دوه کې زخمی دی حالت زخمی دی درې څلور زخمی
وخت دلته قرار کې چې په افغانستان کې اسلامي نظام راشي ځکه چې موږ د قرباني ورکړي دغه نظام د اسلامي نظام په خاطر دغه خاور د اشغال چې خارجيان غلي ده.
We will destroy them. We are going to destroy from our country. They come, they bring bad situation for Afghanistan, for our people, for our civil lives, for our country, for our schools, for our hospitals, everything.
The Harangar Kong troop is the latest in a series of entertainers who have joined Myanmar's growing militia movement. They're among the thousands of young people who are now training in remote parts of the country to fight the military junta that seized power in February.
This comedy troupe used to entertain large crowds with their witty joke telling. The Harangar Kong group was one of the most popular comedy acts in Myanmar. But now all 5 members have put down their microphones and taken up arms. They're the latest in a series of entertainers who have joined Myanmar's growing militia movement. They're among the thousands of young people who are now training in remote parts of the country to fight the military junta that seized power in February.
To be honest, we are artists, and we did not intend to carry guns. We didn't plan to take up arms. But we are doing this now because there is no alternative. We have no fear of holding guns. Our goal is to overthrow the tyrants. It's quite simple. As artists, we want to put on makeup and perform on stage. But we are now holding guns to fight back against those inhuman people.
The comedians took part in mass protests that swept through Myanmar after the February 1st coup. Nearly 900 people have been killed in the brutal crackdown that crushed the protests.
I feel sad and sorry for those who have fallen. The life of one protester cannot be replaced by 100. I feel like I have lost a loved one in my family.
The comedians are training at a camp in the Yoma jungle in central Myanmar's Bagua region. They readily admit that it's been tough going.
Of course, life is not easy in the jungle. You can't compare it with home. Good food is not that important to us. But it's very uncomfortable when it rains. And we have to face insect bites and the rashes that follow. We expected that we would have to face these things when we got here.
Nevertheless, the comedians turned militia members are confident that they can prevail against Myanmar's powerful and battle-hardened military.
Through our training is short, our desire to win and our conviction will help us win. We may not have as much experience as them, but our people's army, armed with solid conviction, can win no matter how well organized they are.
And World News will be back shortly after the break, where crews demolished the remaining portion of the collapsed condominium in Surfside, Florida, allowing rescuers access to new areas of the rubble. Stay with us.
Hari gini 2.000 bisa dapat apa? Kedelai hitam spesial kecap sedap kemasan 2.000 bisa dapat banyak. Nasi goreng, ayam bakar, seafood sampai cocolan. Wow, banyak banget. Kedelai hitam spesial kecap sedap kemasan 2.000 dari Wings Food.
Mulai pakai 2 masker efektif cegah varian baru COVID-19 yang lebih mudah menular. Cara pakai masker 2 lapis dengan mengkombinasikan 2 jenis masker berbeda. Pakai masker bedah di dalam dan masker kain di luar. Pilihan lain selain menggunakan masker ganda adalah dengan menyimpulkan masker medis Anda. Ingat selalu, gunakan masker dengan benar dan perketat protokol kesehatan.
Muldoko telah keluar dari akal sehat.
Kelompok yang menyerang anggota ini diidentifikasi sebagai Laskar Khusus.
Banyak informasi simpang siur di sekitar kita.
Ada pihak-pihak yang telah mengambil suatu sikap dan telah membocorkan informasi.
Mana fakta sebenarnya?
Orang itulah terorisme, bukan Papua terorisme.
Saya nggak mau bunuh dia, di luar dugaan, parah pas kena leher.
Saya akan konfirmasi di Kick Andy Double Check.
Kenapa sih kita harus berinvestasi di PIK 2? Ada 3 alasan utama. Yang pertama, lokasi PIK 2. Alasan kedua, setiap orang yang membeli PIK 2 dianggap sebagai pemegang saham. Membeli produk PIK 2 memang selalu untung karena harga perdana PIK 2 50% di bawah harga market. Alasan yang ketiga, fasilitas. Di mana fasilitas yang tersedia di PIK 2 jauh lebih banyak dari real estate manapun juga.
Metro This Week, setiap Sabtu jam 6:30 malam.
You're back on World News. Demolition crews have set off explosives to bring down the remaining portion of that collapsed condominium building in Surfside, Florida, a key step to resuming the search for victims as rescuers possibly gain access to new areas of the rubble. South Korea reported on Monday 711 new cases of COVID-19, the third day with an increase of more than 700 cases. Korea's Disease Control and Prevention Agency says the number of younger patients has rapidly increased, especially in the metropolitan area. Officials are pushing back on the easing of social distancing measures, urging people to continue wearing masks indoors and outdoors, even if they have been vaccinated. South Korea has administered first doses of vaccines to just 30% of its population, and most younger adults remain unvaccinated. The country has recorded more than 150,000 cases and some 2,000 deaths. Meanwhile, Taiwan is fast-tracking its own domestic COVID-19 vaccines, planning to give emergency approval to 2 vaccines under development, even as they haven't completed the final stage of testing. The 2 vaccines, one developed by local firm Indonesian and the other by an American company, Vaccinity, were backed by the Taiwanese government to the tune of $127 million. Both vaccines have passed their phase 1 and phase 2 trials, but haven't had the large-scale phase 3 trials that established global vaccines like Pfizer and AstraZeneca have been through, involving a comparison of vaccinated and non-vaccinated groups of people. Instead, Taiwan's medical regulators are requiring only that the 2 domestically developed vaccines generate antibodies at the same level as the AstraZeneca jab, which has already been approved for use on the island. Traditional celebrations returned to the 4th of July as the U.S. makes progress on the pandemic. Across the country, friends and families gathered maskless to celebrate the country's Independence Day. President Joe Biden hosted the largest event yet of his presidency, inviting 1,000 vaccinated people to an Independence Day barbecue and fireworks show on the south lawn of the White House. After enduring 16 months of the pandemic and more than 600,000 deaths, President Biden telling Americans the nation is, quote, closer than ever to declaring independence from the virus, while also saying COVID-19 has not been vanquished. The White House encouraged gatherings and fireworks displays to mark the holiday, but health officials have warned of the rise of the highly contagious Delta variant in lower vaccination areas. The U.S. came up short of President Biden's vaccine goal of 70% of Americans receiving at least 1 shot by July 4th. With the poll numbers for pro-Putin political parties sinking ahead of Russia's scheduled fall parliamentary elections, the Kremlin has launched a new campaign strategy clearing the field of would-be challengers. From Moscow, VOA's Charles Maines reports.
In the months that followed the arrest and sentencing of opposition leader Alexei Navalny earlier this year, Kremlin has turned up the pressure on remaining would-be opponents, real or perceived, ahead of fall parliamentary elections. A court ruled Navalny's anti-corruption foundation extremist in a closed trial in June, a designation that forced its liquidation and effectively bans its members from future political life. Meanwhile, other leading opposition politicians found themselves and family members suddenly facing criminal probes, a move designed to force an end to their campaigns and into exile for now.
Of course, the main reason is parliamentary elections. Of course, the Kremlin wants to do everything possible just to get rid of the strong Kremlin opponents.
Behind the move, say critics, the sinking popularity of the Kremlin's ruling United Russia Party before September parliamentary elections.
The rules changed completely compared to 2019. It is now quite impossible for an independent candidate or even a serious opposition candidate not even to get elected, but sometimes even to get registered.
Hardline forces inside the Kremlin appear eager to avoid a repeat of past election mistakes when violations on voting day led to a surge in street protests. Those who've been placed on a government's so-called undesirables list say it's easier for authorities to lock up would-be candidates by any means necessary.
It's simpler to cut everything down to the roots than let the situation develop, because it's unclear what happens next, how society reacts. Why risk that when you can just put people in jail?
Зачем вот это вот все, если можно просто взять и посадить?
Observers say it's evidence of creeping authoritarianism as President Putin enters his third decade in power, backed by controversial constitutional reforms that could keep him in the Kremlin through 2036.
There's always this problem with authoritarian regimes that what you control today, even more must be controlled tomorrow.
In his recent summit with President Joe Biden in Geneva, Russian leader Vladimir Putin rejected suggestions of a crackdown, saying the laws were targeting those openly supported by Washington.
These are the organization and people that promote U.S. policy on Russia. How should we treat them?
Biden says his administration will continue to press the Kremlin on human rights in Russia, but that's little comfort for barred candidates or their would-be supporters as they enter an election season with choices quickly narrowing at the ballot box. Charles Maines for VOA News, Moscow.
And World News will be back after the break. Stay with us.
Miliki gudang multiguna at Peak 2 Bispark. Hadir dengan layout yang fungsional. Bisa difungsikan sebagai gudang, kantor, dan rumah sekaligus. Hanya 3,5 menit menuju interchange. Hanya 18 menit menuju Bandara Internasional Soekarno-Hatta. Miliki gudang multiguna ukuran 6x20 meter. Dengan harga spesial 2,5 miliar rupiah. Kunjungi show unit kami. Hubungi 021 588 8000.
KSP Muldoko telah keluar dari akal sehat.
Kelompok yang menyerang anggota ini diidentifikasi sebagai Laskar Khusus.
Banyak informasi simpang siur di sekitar kita.
Ada pihak-pihak yang telah mengambil suatu sikap dan telah membocorkan informasi.
Mana fakta sebenarnya?
Orang itulah terorisnya, bukan Papua terorisnya.
Saya nggak mau bunuh dia, di luar dugaan, parah pas kena leher.
Saya akan konfirmasi di Kick and di Double Check.
Cara mudah nonton Magna Channel via set-top box. Pasang kabel antena TV ke set-top box. Tekan tombol on pada remote set-top box. Pilih menu, cari saluran, aktifkan daya antena, dan pilih pencarian otomatis. Tunggu beberapa saat, lalu pilih Magna Channel. Kini Anda bisa menikmati tayangan Magna Channel, TV digital terestrial pertama dengan jangkauan nasional.
Khasanah Islam. Setiap minggu jam 2 siang.
And in our top entertainment news tonight, July 3rd marks 50 years since the death of Jim Morrison. Universal takes top 3 spots at box office leading with F9, plus the star-studded line of a Capitol 4th concert. And that's wrapping up our show tonight. I'm Iqbal Himawan. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, and we'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Good night.
Saturday, July 3rd, 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of Jim Morrison's death. The poet and lead singer of rock band The Doors died aged 27 of heart failure in his bathtub in Paris, France. Since that time, his grave at Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris has been a pilgrimage site for fans. Morrison, who was also known as the Lizard King, was born in Melbourne, Florida in 1943. In 1965, he co-founded The Doors with keyboardist Raymond Zarek. Together with guitarist Robbie Krieger and drummer John Densmore, they made 6 studio albums in just 54 months in the late 1960s and early 70s. These include self-titled debut The Doors, Strange Days, and Morrison Hotel. On the morning of July 3rd, first responders found him dead in his apartment's bathtub. When the police arrived, his girlfriend Pamela Corson told them he had been having severe coughing fits that night and started coughing up blood and vomiting at some point. No autopsy was performed, and when the Doors manager Bill Siddons arrived in Paris a day later, Jim had been placed into a coffin, which was already sealed. This led many people to alternative theories, including one placing the death of Morrison in a nightclub bathroom where he allegedly overdosed on heroin that was too pure. The lack of physical evidence and the fact that most people who saw Morrison that fateful night are dead continue to fuel the mystery 50 years on.
This is 1989, my first July 3rd. This man...
So how do y'all want to play?
Although the box office is yet to fully recover from the pandemic, at least one studio has good reason to celebrate this 4th of July weekend. That's in the United States, of course. Universal Pictures currently has the top 3 films at the domestic box office, with F9, The Boss Baby Family Business, and The Forever Purge, according to studio estimates Sunday. As expected, the Fast and Furious sequel, F9, maintained the top spot in its second weekend in North American theaters. The film added an estimated $24 million over the weekend and is projected to take in $32.7 million by the end of Monday, bringing its domestic total to $125.8 million worldwide. F9 will likely surpass the $500 million mark on Monday. Let's hope so. Now, although the 3 films may share a studio name, they're also all different genres with different audience bases. A PG-13 action pick, a narrated horror, and a PG-rated family film. Almost half of the audience for The Boss Baby 2, for example, was 12 and under, while 64% of the audience for The Forever Purge was in the coveted 18 to 34 range and also very ethnically diverse. The successes are also notable for what they were up against outside of theaters. This was a weekend where there were quite a few at-home streaming options as well, with Amazon Prime Video's Chris Pratt blockbuster The Tomorrow War among them. And the Universal films accounted for over 77% of the total projected grosses this weekend. But the rain likely won't continue for long. Next weekend, here we go, Disney and Marvel's Black Widow hits theaters. That ought to be good. And last but not least, Sunday, 4th of July 2021, Happy Independence Day to all Americans out there, marks the 245th birthday of the United States of America and the 41st Capital 4th celebration. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the annual extravaganza, usually a live concert held on the U.S. Capitol's West Lawn in Washington, D.C., this year consisted of a pre-recorded show with a live fireworks presentation. Recording artist and actor Vanessa Williams hosted the program and performed from Washington, D.C. Other featured artists include Alan Jackson, Gladys Knight, Pentatonix, Train, and more, as well as the National Symphony Orchestra under the direction of conductor Jack Everly. A Capital 4th, a July 4th television tradition on PBS, aired the same day Sunday last year from 8 to 9:30 p.m., as well as on the American Forces Network. The program can also be heard over national public radio stations and streaming on Facebook and YouTube. It will also be available as video on demand for a limited time, July 4th to July 18, 2021. That ought to be something.
Metro TV. Kenapa sih kita harus berinvestasi di PIK 2? Ada 3 alasan utama. Yang pertama, lokasi PIK 2. Alasan kedua, setiap orang yang membeli PIK 2 dianggap sebagai pemegang saham. Membeli produk PIK 2 memang selalu untung karena harga perdana PIK 2 50% di bawah harga market. Alasan yang ketiga, fasilitas. Di mana fasilitas yang tersedia di PIK 2 jauh lebih banyak dari real estate manapun juga.
Warnai hari-hari Anda dengan nuansa tayangan kami yang inspiratif,
there is something beautiful in difference,
atraktif,
orders ready,
penuh ide-ide kreatif,
oh that's so cool,
dan yang bakal bikin suasana makin rileks. Semuanya bisa dinikmati di Magna Channel melalui TV digital Anda.
Karena corona masih ada, terus pakai masker. Jangan lupa cuci tangan pakai sabun.
Terus jaga jarak di mana saja.
Hindari juga kerumunan biar aman. Batasi kegiatan di luar rumah, jangan kendor protokol kesehatan.
Vaksin untuk Indonesia.
Miliki gudang multiguna at PIK 2 Bispark. Hadir dengan layout yang fungsional. Bisa difungsikan sebagai gudang, kantor, dan rumah sekaligus. Hanya 3,5 menit menuju interchange. Hanya 18 menit menuju Bandara Internasional Soekarno-Hatta. Miliki gudang multiguna ukuran 6x20 meter. Dengan harga spesial 2,5 miliar rupiah. Kunjungi show unit kami. Hubungi 021 588 8000.
Syariah Economic Talk setiap Kamis jam 8 malam.
Indonesia tanah air beta, pusaka abadi nan jaya. Indonesia sejak dulu kala tetap puja bangsa.
Indonesia tanah air beta, pusaka abadi nan jaya. Indonesia sejak dulu kala tetap dipuja bangsa.
Di sana tempat lahir beta, dibuai dibesarkan bunda, tempat berlindung di hari tua sampai akhir menutup mata, tempat berlindung di hari tua sampai akhir menutup mata.
Metro TV, a part of Media Group News.
Inilah headline news. Pemirsa, nekat beroperasi di masa PPKM darurat, tempat pijat dan spa yang berada di Hotel G2A Gandaria digerebek Polres Metro Jakarta Selatan. Sebanyak 15 terapis wanita dan 1 pengelola tempat ditangkap dalam peristiwa itu. Petugas Satreskrim Polres Metro Jakarta Selatan Senin malam menggerebek tempat pijat dan spa yang berada di Hotel G2 Gandaria Jakarta Selatan. Tempat pijat dan spa tersebut dianggap melanggar lantaran nekat beroperasi pada saat pemberlakuan PPKM darurat oleh pemerintah. Selain mengamankan 15 wanita terapis dan 1 pengelola tempat tersebut, petugas akan juga menyita buku tamu serta menjatuhkan sanksi berupa penyegelan hingga hukuman pidana karena telah melanggar undang-undang karantina wilayah. Pedagang obat kembali diultimatum agar tidak mengkatrol harga obatnya untuk penanganan COVID-19. Pemerintah berjanji akan mengambil langkah tegas bila pedagang obat abai dengan ultimatum tersebut. Hal itu disampaikan oleh Koordinator PPKM Darurat Jawa Bali, Luhut Binsar Panjaitan, saat menggelar diskusi virtual soal penerapan PPKM Darurat. Menurut Luhut, dirinya akan memberi waktu selama 3 hari kepada para penjual obat untuk segera menurunkan harga. Jika ultimatum itu tidak diindahkan, Luhut menegaskan akan mengambil langkah tegas dengan merazia seluruh gudang-gudang distributor obat di sejumlah daerah. Pasca pemberlakuan PPKM darurat, stok obat di pasaran memang semakin langka. Bahkan harga sejumlah obat dan vitamin yang dinilai bisa mencegah virus corona meningkat tajam.
Saya tekankan pada apabila dalam 3 hari ke depan kami masih mendapatkan tanda harga-harga obat tersebut cukup tinggi atau terjadi kelangkaan, maka kami akan mengambil langkah-langkah tegas dengan merazia seluruh gudang-gudang mereka yang sudah kami identifikasikan beradanya. Dan saya minta Kapolri dalam hal ini dan kemudian Polda, Metro dan Kejati untuk melakukan nanti patroli terhadap gudang-gudang obat yang sudah kita punya data. Dan saya kira ASOP bisa mendatain lagi. Jadi paling lambat saya ulangi hari Rabu. Jadi Kamis tidak boleh terjadi kelangkaan. Kita jangan diatur oleh orang-orang yang serakah.
Demikianlah headline news untuk saat ini dan headline news akan hadir 1 jam dari sekarang. Sampai jumpa.
Kasus positif COVID-19 naik signifikan.
Virus novel corona saat ini sudah menyebar
di berbagai fasilitas kesehatan terjadi antrian. Jangan lagi kembali ke hari silam saat situasi dipenuhi dengan ketidakpastian. Jangan hancurkan harapan. Jangan sia-siakan perjuangan. Kita harus maju, bukan mundur lagi ke belakang. Waspada penularan COVID-19. Perketat protokol kesehatan.
Well, we wish you a very happy Monday and thank you for joining us here on Asia Prime on Metro Globe Network, coming to you live from Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm Ralph Tampubolon.
And I'm Amanda Chininta. For the next 2 hours, we have prime stories from all over the world.
And let's check out tonight's top stories.
Indonesian government imposes emergency restrictions on community activities since July 3rd. It's including travel restrictions for water, air, and land transportation.
After a year lost to the pandemic, New York City's most well-known 4th of July traditions were back on Sunday.
The Cannes Film Festival will finally open its doors for its 74th edition.
We begin tonight's edition from the Philippines, where the troops found the last 5 dead from the crash of a transport aircraft in the south, thus raising the death toll to 50 in the military's worst air disaster.
The Lockheed C-130 Hercules was carrying 96 people, mostly combat troops, when it overshot the runway while landing Sunday at the Jolo Airport in Sulu Province. It slammed into a coconut grove beyond the airport and burst into flames in a noontime disaster witnessed by horrified soldiers and villagers. Rescue team evacuated 49 military personnel, including a few who jumped off the aircraft before it exploded and was gutted by fire. Meanwhile, 7 people on the ground were hit by aircraft parts and debris, and 3 of them died. Investigation will consider weather, equipment, and skills of the pilot. The Lockheed C-130 Hercules was one of 2 refurbished U.S. Air Force aircraft handed over to the Philippines, Washington's oldest treaty ally in Asia, as part of military assistance this year. We go to Thailand, where a massive explosion at a factory on the outskirts of Bangkok early on Monday injured at least 11 people and prompted the evacuation of residents from the area.
The fire broke out at around 3 a.m. local time at a foam and plastic pallet manufacturing factory in a southeastern area just outside Bangkok's near Suvarnabhumi Airport. Firefighters could be seen in photos from Thai media climbing through twisted steel wreckage to get their hoses close enough to the flames as they fought to control the blaze. Authorities ordered the evacuation of an area 5 kilometers around the scene amidst fears that thousands of liters of leaking chemicals may cause even more explosions. Evacuation centers were set up in a school and a government office for those forced from their homes. Hours after the explosion, the fire department says it was under control, but the blaze had not yet been completely extinguished, with one warehouse still in flames. To Afghanistan now, where the Taliban marched through northern Afghanistan, gained momentum overnight after capturing several districts from Afghan forces, and the Afghan military says they are outnumbered and also lacking supplies.
More than 300, and as the Taliban grow stronger and take control of more territory in Afghanistan, foreign journalists were invited to view the newly seized weapons on a military base.
Journalists for British broadcaster Sky were given access to the Sultan Kill military base in the Wardak province, where the Taliban showed the arsenal, including guns, explosives, and vehicles, some labeled property of the U.S. government. The groups pushed closer to the capital, Kabul, and it comes as U.S.-led coalition troops are withdrawing from the country 20 years on from when they first arrived. A civilian says the Taliban had brought them security, while the group shares videos on social media showing off territorial gains as part of a propaganda push. Meanwhile, the Afghan government remains relatively quiet, with few officials willing to make appearances.
نه دای خپل کټ کې د دای ګروپو ته به هیڅ څوکم چې لګ عقل ولري فکر ولري او افغاني احساس ولري په داس ګروپو کې به څوک کار ته زړه خنه طالبان نه وو راغی ډي سي وچ کور کې ولګدو دای زخمی کو دوزو کې زخمی دی حالت زخمی دی درې چالر زخمی
وقت دلته قرار کې چې په افغانستان کې اسلامي نظام راشي ځکه چې موږ د څه قرباني ورکړي دغه نظام د اسلامي نظام په خاطر د دغه خاور د اشغال چې خارجيان غلي دا.
We will destroy them. We are going to destroy our country. They come, they bring bad situation for Afghanistan, for our people, for our civil lives, for our country, for our schools, for our hospitals, everything they destroyed.
The U.S. forces have left the Bagram airfield, the main American base in Afghanistan, and handed control over to the Afghan National Security Forces.
But as VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb reports, that does not mean the American troops' withdrawal is complete.
For nearly 2 decades, Bagram Airfield served as the center of the U.S. fight to remove Taliban forces from power and take down al-Qaeda terrorists. Its handover is one of the final steps before the United States completes its troop withdrawal. But President Joe Biden put to rest speculation the U.S. would complete its exit around July 4th, the U.S. Independence Day.
Is the drawdown going to be done in the next few days?
No. No, we're on track exactly as to where we expect it to be. But I wanted to make sure there was enough, quote, running room that wouldn't be able to do it all till September.
And the Pentagon suggested Friday the completion could still be weeks away.
I mean, the president made it clear that he wanted the drawdown complete by early
September, we believe we're going to be able to complete this process by the end of August. Clearly, with the closure of Bagram, the locus of our efforts are in and around Kabul at this point.
With U.S. airstrike capabilities out of Afghanistan, the U.S. will now rely on aircraft based more than 1,000 kilometers away to continue its counter-terror fight against Islamic State and al-Qaeda. General Frank McKenzie, the head of U.S. Central Command, told VOA in a recent interview.
They come from a long way. It's a long haul to get forces, aircraft into Afghanistan from over the horizon.
But Bagram, losing it, clearly that's going to make things much more difficult.
It's going to be difficult. It's not going to be impossible.
Giving up that base is a real loss for American national security interests.
Bradley Bowman is a defense expert with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who flew Black Hawk helicopters in Afghanistan.
We're going to be have less visibility, less agility, less capability in taking the fight to our enemies in terrorism central. That's what's happening as a result of this political decision, this timeline-based, precipitous, conditions-ignoring, commander advice ignoring withdrawal that we're currently seeing from Afghanistan.
FDD's Long War Journal says that since the start of the withdrawal on May 1st, the Taliban has doubled the number of districts it controls, from 77 to about 160 districts. Retired General Joseph Votel says the Afghan forces still have significant capabilities, but the Taliban gains are cause for concern.
I don't think we're in a situation where this is an immediate collapse type of scenario, but the Afghan forces are going to need support.
American public support for the war plummeted in recent years, pushing U.S. leaders to call for a political solution while vowing to continue providing money and aircraft maintenance support from afar. But only time will tell whether that will be enough to prevent the Taliban from continuing its onslaught of territorial gains. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
We go to Japan now, where rescue workers slogged through mud and debris on Monday after a giant landslide ripped through a Japanese seaside resort town and killed at least 3 people.
At least 20 were initially described as missing, but media report later says 80 people were unaccounted for and not yet among the official missing. Part of the confusion is that Atami is a vacation city and some buildings are unoccupied for long parts of the year, with their listed residents living in other areas. One witness told the Associated Press that it will take, quote, an unimaginable effort to recover, end quote, from the disaster which took place on Saturday. Mud crashed into rows of houses on a mountainside in Atami following several days of heavy rains. The disaster and its cleanup comes less than 3 weeks before officials attempt to stage an Olympics during a worsening pandemic in Japan. Meanwhile, hundreds of troops, firefighters, and other rescue workers worked in thick mud that covered city streets, the scene obscured by continuing rain and fog. Their work was backed by 3 Coast Guard ships and 6 military drones.
そしてこの川がどうなっているか、この坂道がどうなっているかというと。
A rather spike in South Korea now, as it reported 711 new cases of COVID-19 on Monday, making it the 3rd day with an increase of more than 700 cases.
Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency states that the number of younger patients has rapidly increased, especially in the metropolitan area. The agency urged people to wear masks indoor and outdoors, despite having been vaccinated. A senior government official said South Korea is in talks with Pfizer and Moderna to produce COVID-19 shots in the country and is ready to offer the capacity to make up to 1 billion doses immediately.
중앙방역대책본부는 예방접종률이 높아짐에 따라 60세 이상 연령층의 발생은 감소하고 있지만 최근 수도권 중심으로 젊은 층에서의 환자가 급격히 증가하면서 하루에 700명대의 발생이 지속되고 있습니다. 마스크 착용, 그리고 충분한 환기, 위중상 시에 검사받기 등의 기본적인 방역수칙을 철저히 지켜주시기를 바랍니다. 예방접종을 받았더라도 실내에서는 반드시 마스크를 착용해 주시고 실외에서도 다중이 모인 장소에서는 마스크를 착용해 주실 것을 거듭 요청을 드립니다.
Moving on to Taiwan, where virus vaccines will fast-track its own domestic COVID-19 vaccines. Taiwan is planning to give emergency approval to 2 vaccines under development at the moment on the island, even though they haven't completed its final stage of testing.
Taiwan developed COVID-19 vaccines, bringing new hope to the island, but still needs an emergency approval to be used massively for the Taiwanese. One of the vaccines is being developed by local firm Medigen and the other by an American company, Vaccinity, with 2 X's there. The 2 vaccines are backed by the Taiwanese government to the tune of $127 million. Both vaccines have passed phases 1 and 2 of the trials. However, they have not had the large-scale phase 3 trial that established global vaccines like Pfizer and AstraZeneca, involving a comparison of vaccinated and non-vaccinated groups of people. Instead, Taiwan's medical regulators require only that the 2 domestically developed vaccines generate antibodies at the same level as the Astra jab, which has already been approved for use on the island.
The government says that, okay, we are going to rely on the level of neutralizing antibody and make the argument that, okay, if the vaccine induces sufficient level of neutralizing antibody, that's good enough. All right. But no one said that is good enough. No one internationally has said that.
Pope Francis is recovering at Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Monday after surgery for diverticulitis. We have more details after the break on Asia Prime.
Indonesia memiliki potensi ekonomi syariah terlengkap.
Bahkan kita diprediksi menjadi kiblat keuangan dan ekonomi syariah dunia.
Seperti apa ekonomi syariah Indonesia?
Bagaimana kita bisa mengubah dunia lewat ekonomi syariah?
Saya Zakia Arfan dengan ekonom sekaligus ahli dan praktisi keuangan syariah.
Saya akan membahasnya bersama narasumber terkemuka hanya dalam Syariah Economic Talk bersama saya Gunawan Yasni setiap Kamis jam 8 malam di Metro TV.
Breaking News Metro TV.
Gempa bermagnitudo 6,1 mengguncang sebagian wilayah.
Persija Jakarta sukses menjuarai Piala Menpora 2021.
Pimpinan Media Group News bertemu Wakil Presiden Kiai Haji Ma'ruf Amin.
Pemirsa, setelah viral di media sosial, 32 warga negara India ditolak masuk Indonesia.
Pemirsa, Metro TV memberikan santunan kepada anak yatim piatu di Yayasan Masjid At-Taqwa.
Dengarkan Metro TV di radio. More than just news. Streaming sekarang di metrotvnews.com dan medcom.id.
Kenapa sih kita harus berinvestasi di PIK 2? Ada 3 alasan utama. Yang pertama, lokasi PIK 2. Alasan kedua, setiap orang yang membeli PIK 2 dianggap sebagai pemegang saham. Membeli produk PIK 2 memang selalu untung karena harga perdana PIK 2 50% di bawah harga market. Alasan yang ketiga, fasilitas. Di mana fasilitas yang tersedia di PIK 2 jauh lebih banyak dari real estate manapun juga.
Saat ini obat ampuh untuk melawan virus corona belum ada.
Saya ingin agar protokol kesehatan, perubahan perilaku di masyarakat menjadi perhatian kita. Kita fokus kampanye pakai masker.
Semua wajib pakai masker di Media Group. Disiplin memakai masker tidak hanya untuk melindungi diri dan sesama, tapi juga untuk menjaga Indonesia kita.
Menjadi jurnalis bukan sekadar profesi, tetapi jalan juang berdedikasi. Untuk mengungkap bukan sekadar memberitakan, untuk menggali bukan sekadar mencari, karena menyuarakan apa yang benar adalah tanggung jawab kami.
Memberikan bantuan masyarakat terus memantau
agar yang kami upayakan menjadi manfaat. Jurnalis Metro TV hadir di semua situasi. The Journalist, setiap Senin jam 8 malam di pekan pertama.
Welcome back to Asia Prime. Demolition crews set off explosives late Sunday to bring down the damaged remaining collapsed South Florida condo building, a key step to resuming the search for victims.
Crews were to begin.
We're ending day 11. This has been a horrendous tragedy for Surfside, for these families, for the world. And together we're pushing through to do the very best we can to help the families who are waiting and help those who've been displaced. Honestly, this precise moment, I feel relief. I feel relief because this building was unstable. The building was hampering our search efforts. Really, we were stuck that we couldn't get to a certain part of the pile, I've heard them say that they think there are voids in this area, areas where they'll be able to search. So I'm excited.
Still from the U.S., fireworks were unintentionally detonated as they were being set up for an Independence Day show in Ocean City, Maryland, leaving employees of the fireworks company with minor injuries.
A few hours after the blast, the city announced that the day's fireworks shows in multiple locations had been canceled out of an abundance of caution. The Ocean City Fire Department says in a news release they were alerted to a vehicle fire Sunday morning and responded to find the fireworks that had gone off on the beach. An undisclosed number of employees had minor injuries but declined transport to a hospital. A safe zone around the fireworks area prevented any beach or boardwalk patrons from being injured. Police say 8 people were wounded early Sunday in a shooting near a Fort Worth car wash, in which it appears multiple guns were used.
A statement from police said the 8 gunshot victims were taken to hospitals and were in stable condition. Fort Worth Police Chief Neil Noakes described it as an, quote, extremely tragic event, end quote, coming on the 4th of July. Police said an officer in the area heard gunshots, and when officers arrived, they found the 8 people who had been shot.
You can see the ES girl in the back.
This is an extremely tragic event on what is supposed to be a festive occasion on Independence Day. We're seeing way too much gun violence across the nation. We're seeing it here in Fort Worth. We're seeing it in the Metroplex. What I want the citizens to know is we're doing everything we can at Fort Worth PD to put a stop to the senseless violence and to take guns out of the hands of criminals in Fort Worth, Texas. It will not be tolerated.
Protests were held in Santiago Sunday, just ahead of the launch of the first session of the Chilean Constitutional Convention, which will draft the nation's new constitution.
The historic moment was to be the start of several sessions over the next 9 months to draft the new charter, which will replace the one written during the 1973 to 1990 military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Protests began when several hundred people crossed the security fences of the National Congress building, where the inauguration was to take place, shouting slogans against the political system and demanding the freedom of the people who were imprisoned during social unrest in 2019. Police fired tear gas and used water cannons. Protesters responded by throwing stones at them.
A group of assembly members then rose up in the room just ahead of the opening of the session to protest against the violence and stating that the situation was unacceptable. Chileans appointed 155 people during elections in May to draft the new constitution. It's the world's first joint constitution convention upholding gender equality, with 78 men and 77 women, including 17 representatives of indigenous groups.
Pope Francis is recovering at Rome's Gemelli Hospital on Monday after surgery for diverticulitis, a problem in the large intestines.
The Pope underwent surgery Sunday. U.S. President Joe Biden on Sunday says the American people were, quote, closer than ever, end quote, to declaring, quote, independence, end quote, from the coronavirus.
The president made the comments as he hosted more than 1,000 guests for a July 4th celebration on the South Lawn of the White House. Biden wanted all Americans to celebrate too after enduring 16 months of disruption in the pandemic and more than 605,000 deaths.
Years ago, we declared our independence from a distant king. Today, we are closer than ever to declaring our independence from a deadly virus. That's not to say the battle against COVID-19 is over. We've got a lot more work to do. But just as our declaration in 1776 was a call to action, not a reason for complacency or a claim of victory. It was a call to action. The same is true today. We all know powerful variants have emerged, like the Delta variant. But the best defense against these variants is to get vaccinated. my fellow Americans, is the most patriotic thing you can do. So please, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it. Do it now. For yourself, for your loved ones, for your community, and for your country. We never again want to be where we were a year ago today. So today, while the virus hasn't been vanquished, we know this: it no longer controls our lives. It no longer paralyzes our nation. And it's within our power to make sure it never does again. Happy 4th of July, America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Still from the U.S., after a year lost to the coronavirus, New York City's most well-known 4th of July traditions are back on Sunday.
The traditional Macy's 4th of July fireworks show returned in full form with a display over the East River as shells were shot from 5 barges in a televised choreographed spectacle. This year, crowds were welcome to gather. The show was broadcast live on NBC as part of a 2-hour special featuring artists such as the Black Pumas, Coldplay, One Republic, and Reba McEntire. The performance appearances were pre-recorded around the country in front of live audiences. Last year, because of pandemic restrictions, there were a series of shorter fireworks shows in the days leading up to the holiday, with the locations kept secret in advance to keep people from congregating. The Italian government continues its efforts to suppress the rising of COVID cases there, including allowing foreign nationals living in the country to be vaccinated. Details up next.
Kenapa sih kita harus berinvestasi di PIK 2? Ada 3 alasan utama. Yang pertama, lokasi PIK 2. Alasan kedua, setiap orang yang membeli PIK 2 dianggap sebagai pemegang saham. Membeli produk PIK 2 memang selalu untung karena harga perdana PIK 2 50% di bawah harga market. Alasan yang ketiga, fasilitas. Di mana fasilitas yang tersedia di PIK 2 jauh lebih banyak dari real estate manapun juga.
Oh ya, buat kalian yang udah di mobil mau berangkat, jangan lupa safety belt-nya dipakai ya. Terus, cek juga ban, rem, dan pastinya harus selalu jaga jarak aman sama mobil lain. Selalu hati-hati di jalan raya karena ada orang tercinta yang selalu menunggu.
Banyak nelayan tidak bisa melaut karena kondisi perahunya tidak layak pakai. Nelayan membutuhkan perahu yang berkualitas agar mereka bisa kembali produktif. Melalui program Susi Cek Ombak, saya Susi Pujiastuti mengajak Anda berdonasi melalui rekening Yayasan Benih Baik Indonesia, Nelayan Berseri Laut Lestari.
Mulai pakai 2 masker efektif cegah varian baru COVID-19 yang lebih mudah menular. Cara pakai masker 2 lapis dengan mengkombinasikan 2 jenis masker berbeda. Pakai masker bedah di dalam dan masker kain di luar. Pilihan lain selain menggunakan masker ganda adalah dengan menyimpulkan masker medis Anda. Ingat selalu, gunakan masker dengan benar dan perketat protokol kesehatan.
Tiny home building is a big business.
The architecture is modern and the landscape is very minimalist.
So, you think you're an amazing cook.
My dream is to become a professional chef.
Mau tahu resep rahasia keluarga selebriti?
Ada rasa wanginya juga.
Mau jadi koki andalan di rumah?
When I was about 20 years old, I spent several months traveling through India, and we naturally would be eating Indian food. Cooking is just not a vocation; it's a calling.
Mau cari inspirasi interior?
1, 2, 3.
And if you want to live tiny,
less house, more fun.
This is so fun.
So cute.
It's so amazing. Oh, that's so cool.
Atau ada niatan renovasi rumah?
We all love to create our dream home. The dream becomes reality.
Wow. Dapetin semua inspirasinya di Mola Awen. Senin sampai Jumat, mulai jam 4 hingga jam 6 sore. Hanya di Magna Channel.
Welcome back to Asia Prime. The Indonesian government imposes emergency restrictions on community activities since July 3rd, including travel restrictions for water, air, and land transportations.
For those who want to travel domestically by air, they must produce vaccination cards at least for first jab besides PCR test results. The number of passengers at Soekarno-Hatta International Airport in Tangerang, Banten on Monday has been declining. From Metro Globe Network's observation, the airport's terminals were mostly empty. Management of the airport, in cooperation with Port Health Authority, provide vaccination centers where passengers can get free immunization. The number of flights from and to Soekarno-Hatta Airport on Monday declines by 40% compared to Sunday, when the restriction had not yet been put into effect. The Indonesian government have added more days of quarantine to 8 days from previously 5 for Indonesians and foreigner nationals who is entering Indonesia from overseas trips. This decision is effective since July 6th.
Additional days of quarantine was announced by head of Indonesia's COVID-19 task force, Lieutenant General Ganip Warsito, on Sunday. Indonesian and foreign nationals who come from overseas must also produce a vaccination certificate for a complete vaccination of 2 jabs. For Indonesians who have yet to be vaccinated, will be inoculated upon arrival before being taken to quarantine locations. Requirement to perform vaccination cards will not be applied for foreign nationals from countries that have travel corridor arrangement with Indonesia. Indonesia so far has signed travel corridor arrangements with the United Arab Emirates, China, South Korea, and Singapore as of February this year. The government of Italy continues its efforts to suppress the rising of COVID-19 cases there, including allowing foreign nationals living in the country to be vaccinated.
The government has been Italy has been opening its doors for foreign tourists, a decision made thanks to the government's efforts to fight the coronavirus, including vaccinations to foreign nationals residing in the country.
We have with us this evening at Asia Prime our correspondent in Milan, Italy, Rizka Wulandari. Good evening from Jakarta. Good afternoon to you, Rizka. So tell us more about vaccination for foreigners there.
Good evening, Jakarta. Yes. Here in Italy, also me as a foreigner, I have a right to get vaccinated. So, Italian government has been make a campaign about the vaccine since 27th of December 2020. And basically everybody who has the Carta Sanitaria or a card for the health system in Italy, we have a right to get vaccinated. So if you are happy to get vaccinated, we have this possibility. And of course, I'm as a foreigner as well, has experienced this in Italy, together with some other foreigners coming from Peru, from Egypt, and so on. We get vaccinated also as an immigrant, as a worker, as a wife in Italy. We have a right to get vaccinated based on our background health. Also, I understood that even the ambassador or the diplomatic entity has the right also to get vaccinated here in Italy.
Right. So other than the vaccination measures, we just received news that Italy is actually quite bold in choosing to open its borders and become once again open to foreigners, while some parts of the rest of the world are choosing to close its borders in order to contain the spread of the Delta variant.
Okay, we have to go back again to the history of how Italy fighting against this virus. Mm-hmm. So we closed our territory since November 2020, which we didn't able to do any religious activities, parties, and then tourism activities has been closed since December, January to May. Means that we didn't do Christmas, we didn't do New Year holiday, we passed also the Epiphania, we also couldn't do Pascua, Easter maybe in English. this is our sacrifice. Also, for those from England, for example, that now has another case of Delta, when they arrive in Italy, they are obligated to have 5 days of quarantine. So it's not that easy. When you say we open our border to tourism, all the protocol are applied. Anyway, we have to keep our mask, our face mask, if we are in the crowd or if we are in the closed situation, like in the public transportation, on the room, in the hotel, and everything. It's not the mean that we can remove our face mask.
Talking with our Italian correspondent Rizka Wulandari joining us from Milan. Now, Rizka, shifting our attention to the Euro 2020, I have 2 questions. Number one, Italy was hosting some of the games. Tell us, how did the government prevent the spread of the virus among spectators coming from other countries? And also second, Italy is still in contention, although it's played in London. How does the government plan to curb the spread of the virus from people who might gather to watch in public places?
Okay, basically Italy, Rome was the opening place for the event. And of course for Italy, this is something very important, also a symbol of we as Italian, also Italian people, also the European, that we are fighting the virus and we restart again. But of course, restart means we have to apply all the protocols anti-COVID-19 on the process. And that's why in Italy, everything is tracked. You cannot just enter the stadium. You have to pass so many restriction rules. If you are okay with this rule, you can be allowed to enter the stadium, which is you are vaccinated or you are recovered from in England itself, there are Delta variants spreading. So to the protocol of COVID-19, seeing what happened in Italy. Until today, there's no news about any explosion of cases after the event in Rome last Saturday.
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of effort and resources to be able to host something as big as the Euro Cup and also try to keep cases down. Now, Mariska, you are reporting live from Milan, one of the world's capital of fashion. Now, what can you tell us from how the fashion industry is trying to cope and survive and go through the second year of the pandemic there in Italy?
Well, basically, it's also being a big lesson to the fashion world, but we have Mr. Armani. Yeah. Mr. Armani is one of our leader, senior, we call him as like our patron and so on, and he has set a good example to all the fashion designers since the beginning. He react well to the government restriction by making all the fashion exposition online. Also, his brand leading the social movement to help the together with to our gifting or online purchasing. So basically, the fashion industry understood that it's really important to respect the rules, and then they think.
All right, one last thing before I let you go, Rizka, can you give us the latest update on Pope Francis's condition? Has he left the hospital in Rome, or if he hasn't, can you give us an update as to when that will be?
Sorry, I cannot hear you. Sorry.
Can you give us the latest update on Pope Francis's condition in the hospital in Rome? Has he left the hospital, or if he hasn't, is there an information timetable when he will do so?
Oh, I'm so sorry. For about Pope Francis, I have no information yet. I will update you soon when I have the information.
All right, very well. Thank you, Rizka. Our correspondent in Italy, Rizka Wulandari, joining us from Milan here on Asia Prime. On to Money Matters now. Asian stocks traded lower Monday due to resurgence of COVID cases and concerns that the economy may be starting to lose the recovery momentum.
The Nikkei 225 in Japan fell 0.6%. Meanwhile, IDX Composite edged lower 0.29%. Mercy Wijaya has reports.
On Monday, U.S. job report last week signaled the U.S. economic recovery remained intact and live in faster sentiment, with U.S. non-farm payroll increased by a bigger than expected 850,000 in June 2021. But China's manufacturing and services activity slowed sharply in June to a 15-month low, weighed down by a resurgence of COVID-19 cases in southern China, adding concerns that the world's second-largest economy may be starting to lose some recovery momentum. China's Caixin Composite PMI in June recorded at 50.6, down significantly from May's reading at 53.8. In Japan, Nikkei 225 falling 0.5% following a surge in COVID-19 infections in Tokyo, just weeks before the city hosts the Olympics. Jakarta Stock Exchange Composite Index traded lower today as COVID-19 cases increased sharply in the last 2 weeks. Indonesia is battling COVID-19 Delta variant cases, which added more than 20,000 new cases a day. Investors are waiting for the emergency micro-lockdown policy effectiveness to contain the virus. From Jakarta, I'm Mercy Wijaya reporting for Metro Globe Network.
Kenapa sih kita harus berinvestasi di PIK 2? Ada 3 alasan utama. Yang pertama, lokasi PIK 2. Alasan kedua, setiap orang yang membeli PIK 2 dianggap sebagai pemegang saham. Membeli produk PIK 2 memang selalu untung karena harga perdana PIK 2 50% di bawah harga market. Alasan yang ketiga, fasilitas. Di mana fasilitas yang tersedia di PIK 2 jauh lebih banyak dari real estate manapun juga.
Momen terbaik Ibu Susi di Susi Cek Ombak.
Yang membuat dunia politik menarik untuk Bapak ini apa, Pak? Kopiku saya tenggelamin.
Ini waktu Bu Susi lagi random banget. Nah, kalau ini pas ngerjain menteri.
Dekat apa dengan Pak Sandi dan Pak Erick? Boleh ditelepon?
Ya, nggak ada yang ngangkat di teleponnya, kacau.
Siap, Ibu Host. Saya lupa.
Susi Cek Ombak, setiap Rabu jam 8 malam. Disiplin pakai masker. Hindari risiko sangat tinggi penularan COVID-19 saat tidak memakai masker. Risiko penularan tinggi saat orang sakit tanpa masker berinteraksi dengan orang sehat dengan masker. Risiko penularan sedang jika orang sakit yang memakai masker berinteraksi dengan orang sehat tanpa masker. Dan risiko rendah saat keduanya memakai masker. Memakai masker dapat menurunkan risiko terinfeksi virus corona. Ayo pakai masker sekarang. Nikmati Metro TV HD di saluran digital Anda.
Ayo semuanya, dukung migrasi TV digital. Bersih gambarnya, jernih suaranya, dan canggih teknologinya.
Karena corona masih ada, terus pakai masker. Jangan lupa cuci tangan pakai sabun.
Terus jaga jarak di mana saja.
Hindari juga kerumunan biar aman.
Batasi kegiatan di luar rumah. Jangan kendor protokol kesehatan. Vaksin untuk Indonesia.
Metro Pagi Prime Time, setiap hari jam 5 pagi.
A collaboration between Formula One and intensive care medics has produced a device they hope will transform care for people who are critically ill with COVID-19 and other respiratory diseases.
The device amplifies sound so doctors and nurses wearing full protective clothing and respirators can still talk to each other, to patients, and remotely to relatives. For emergency room doctors, it can feel like a race to treat patients. The infectiousness of respiratory diseases like COVID-19 makes it essential for staff to wear full protective clothing when treating the critically ill in intensive care wards. But the elastomeric masks the doctor wear makes it impossible for medical teams to communicate with each other.
Its components are cheap and simple to source, but not easy to put in an electronic package which would work. It's the result of a collaboration between Professor Tim Coates, who is the Professor of Emergency Medicine at the University of Leicester, and the Alpine Formula One team. When the pandemic first started in the UK, the F1 teams put their engineering brain bank called Project Pit Lane and offered to find solutions for the health services. They first got together to produce ventilators, so Coates realized he could use the engineering know-how and the skill that goes into producing these highly sophisticated F1 machines. Britain's royal palace says the Duchess of Cambridge is self-isolating after a contact tested positive for the COVID-19 virus.
Kate had been due to attend events with her husband Prince William on Monday, celebrating the 73rd birthday of Britain's National Health Service. But the couple's Kensington Palace office says the Duchess is self-isolating at home after coming into contact last week with someone who subsequently tested positive. Under current British rules, contacts of confirmed coronavirus cases must quarantine at home for 10 days.
Palace says Kate Middleton does not have any symptoms of COVID, and both she and William received first doses of the COVID vaccine back in May.
Sites on UNESCO's World Heritage List have felt the impact of the pandemic as travel restrictions limited access to these important places.
But while the organization hopes to come out of the health crisis stronger, it faces other challenges from climate change and also a lack of funding. The Kremlin
during the pandemic, up to 90% of its sites were closed. China sent a new meteorological satellite into planned orbit from the Huquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China on Monday morning.
The satellite, Fengyun 3E, was launched by a Long March 4C rocket, 7:28 in the morning local time, and this was the 377th launch mission of the Long March rocket series. Equipped with 11 remote sensing devices, FY-3E will be the world's first meteorological satellite in early morning orbit for civil service. It is designed with a lifespan of 8 years and will mainly obtain the information about atmospheric temperature, humidity, and other meteorological parameters for numerical prediction applications to improve China's weather forecast accuracy. It will also monitor the global snow and ice coverage, sea surface temperature, natural disasters, and ecology to better respond to climate change and prevent and mitigate meteorological disasters. But it will not monitor or predict who will win the match between Italy and Spain, I don't think.
I don't think so. I don't think so. We will just have to watch and see.
And that will do it for us here on Asia Prime. I'm Rauf Tampubolon.
And I'm Amanda Chininta. We'll see you back here on Asia Prime with Metro Globe Network tomorrow, same time. Have a good evening.
Metro TV. Kenapa sih kita harus berinvestasi di PIK 2? Ada 3 alasan utama. Yang pertama, lokasi PIK 2. Alasan kedua, setiap orang yang membeli PIK 2 dianggap sebagai pemegang saham. Membeli produk PIK 2 memang selalu untung karena harga perdana PIK 2 50% di bawah harga market. Alasan yang ketiga, fasilitas. Di mana fasilitas yang tersedia di PIK 2 jauh lebih banyak dari real estate manapun juga.
KSP Mundo